All right. Welcome to today's Northern Grapes Project webinar. My name is Alex Caberly. I'm the Program Assistant for the Northern Grapes Project. Thank you for tuning in today with the date change. We will continue the remaining April and May webinars on the second Tuesday of each month. Today's webinar is Impact of Training Systems on Viticulture Performance of Cold-Hardy Wine Grapes with Amaya, Atucha, Madeline, Wimmer, and Paolo Sabbatini. Amaya Atucha is an assistant professor of horticulture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she has a research and extension program in fruit crops focused on production practices to increase sustainability and fruit quality. Madeline Wimmer is a graduate student also at University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Atucha group. Paolo Sabbatini is an associate professor of horticulture at Michigan State University. He has research and extension responsibilities in viticulture, and for the Northern Grapes Project, Paolo has evaluated wine grape cultivars to optimize vine productivity and quality. Remember that as a participant in the webinar, we ask that you keep your microphones muted if you have them, as well as your web cameras off. If you are having any technical difficulties, please type a note in the chat bar over to the bottom right side of your screen, and I'll do what I can to help you. If you have questions, please type them in the chat bar as well. We'll have a question and answer session after each presentation, and make sure to type your questions anytime if you have them with your chat bar set to send to everyone. Although the 5-year Northern Grapes Project concluded in August 2016, we will continue with the Northern Grapes newsletters and monthly webinar series thanks to these generous industry donations, and especially to Mike White's efforts to fundraise for the Northern Grapes webinar series. Now I'd like to turn it over to Amaya Atucha and Madeline Wimmer for today's presentation. Okay, so Amaya, you are now presenter.
All right, thank you, and thank you for having us, for participating in this webinar. Just let me see if I can change the slide. I don't think I'm able to move this to advance the slide.
Okay. Let me try this.
Okay, perfect. Now I'm the presenter, so it should work. All right, so thank you for being here. And today what we are going to present, myself and Madeline Wimmer, who is a graduate student in my program, is the work that she did looking at the impact of training systems for Brianna, Frontenac, La Crescent, and Marquette in southeast Wisconsin. So just introduction of Wisconsin, the growing area. So when we started this project started in 2012, and the stats for 2011 in the number of acres we had in Wisconsin was around 360. By now, 2016, 2017, we estimate we have around 600 acres, so we have almost double the acreage of vineyards in the state. The average vineyard size here in Wisconsin is between 1 to 5 acres. And the economic contribution of the vineyards to the Wisconsin economy was estimated in 2012 around $77.1 million. The majority of the vineyards in Wisconsin are in the central south part of the state, including the Door County and the peninsula here that we have in the Michigan Lake. That is where the majority of the vineyards are. Today, the study that we're going to be presenting today was in Dane County, so in the southern part of the state, close to Madison, in one of the research stations at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So the varieties that are mostly planted in Wisconsin, this is part of the publication from TAC of 2014, is Frontenac and Marquette, the red varieties, the most planted here in Wisconsin, and Brianna and La Crescent. That's why we chose these varieties to be part of the study. When we started this project in 2012, the majority of the vineyards were established as a BSP. You can see here in the picture, this is a picture of one of our research vineyards. And so one of the questions we had, and one of the questions the growers had, well, what is the most efficient way, what's the best way to grow these varieties and tend to have a different growing habit that the traditional Vitis vinifera. We knew from research done in Vitis vinifera that training systems do have an impact depending on which training system you're using on the growth load, as well as the direction of the shoots, whether you're growing upwards or downwards, the cordon length and the height, as well as the canopy density, how many layers of leaves you have on those canopies, and as well as the canopy architecture, whether you have multiple canopies, an upper and a lower canopy. And very important for us is the potential for mechanization, depending on the training system that you use. All of this, of course, is going to have an impact on your potential yield and your fruit quality. That was one of the aspects that we're looking at in this study, but as well as cross-susceptibility, depending whether you have, a high quartering or a VSP, where those shoots are positioning in the canopy, the vine vigor, the disease incidence, where you have a canopy that's denser than others and you have less airflow, and the labor requirements that, even though it's something that we did not consistently measure in this study, we did have some data collections that we will be presenting as well. So the research question that we had was, how do training systems are going to affect yield, fruit composition, talking here about sugar concentration, acids, and pH, and the vine growth habits for the cold climate hybrid grape cultivars. That was our main research questions for the project that we will be presenting today. The vineyard was established in 2012, and it was roughly a third of an acre. And we had very fertile soils in this study, a loam and a still loam mix of soils, and we had around 48 panels in this research vineyard. We had 3 treatments: a vertical shoot positioning, which is the one that you can see to your left. So that is the traditional way that most of the viniferas are grown. And the cordon was established around 3 feet from the ground. Then, if you look all the way to your right, is the high wire cordon, where the cordon was established around 6 feet in height. And then in the middle, you have a hybrid between those two training systems, which is the Scott Henry, and it's a double canopy. You can see an upper cordon that was established around 4 feet from the ground, and a lower pair of cordons that are established just like the vertical shoot positioning. And then in the upper part of the canopy, the shoots are going upwards, while in the lower part of the canopy, you can see that the shoots are growing in a downward position. So those were the 3 treatments that we had. Here's a picture of the Scott Henry. I think that not all of you are familiar with this training system. You can see on the left, that's how the vines look during the growing season, right before harvest. And then on the right side, you can see how the vines would look by pruning time in late spring, early spring. The 4 cultivars we had were Brianna, La Crescent, Marquette, and Frontenac. And as I said, these were the cultivars that at the time were the most planted cultivars here in Wisconsin. What we did in terms of general practices for this study was dormant pruning in early spring. We did a pre-bloom shoot thinning. So what we did here is for all the training systems, in a way to standardize how many shoots we had, we thinned all the treatments to 6 shoots per foot of cordon length. We did shoot positioning for the VSP. We just tuck all those shoots going in an upward position. And then for the Scott Henry and for the high cordon, we comb the shoots to a downward position. We did leaf pulling a little bit after fruit set to remove some of the leaves close to the clusters, so we can expose more of those clusters to sunlight. And we also removed some laterals to achieve the same goals of exposing the fruit to the light. We did hedging and skirting of the shoots when needed, and importantly, we did reduce 20% of the clusters for the Scott Henry treatment in all of the varieties. We did this because the data that we were presenting was the first 2 years of cropping this vine, and we were concerned of overcropping them. So when we present the results, please keep in mind that for the Scott Henry, we did reduce 25% of the clusters right after actually before during bloom time, we remove those efflorescence. So now I'm going to pass it on to Madeline, who's actually the one that did all the work, and she will present some of the results she has for this study.
Thank you, Amaya. Hi, everybody. I'm Madeline Wimmer, and I'm going to be taking us through the results for the rest of this presentation. So starting off by looking at some of our weather patterns from year to year, here's a graph showing growing degree day accumulations for 2015 and 2016, 2015 being in red, 2016 in black. And this is in degrees Fahrenheit, showing the accumulation from April to September. And in 2015, we saw that we had about 2,700 growing degree day units and 2,800 in 2016. And this is fairly typical of a Wisconsin growing season. So look at rainfall patterns. Here's a graph showing rainfall accumulation in inches. And once again, you can see that the total accumulation, 2015 having about 27.5 inches and 2016 around 29, was not very different from year to year, but what I'd like to point out is that we did have a lot more rainfall in between grazing and harvest, and we saw that this affected our fruit quality towards the end of the season. When during harvest, we measured yield in terms of pounds of fruit per foot of trellis, and we did this to standardize differences between cordon lengths between the different vines. And so here's 4 graphs showing the 4 cultivars, Brianna and La Crescent on the left, with Frontenac and Marquette on the right, showing crop yield per trellis foot in pounds. And you can see the high cordon system is on the left there, Scott Henry treatment in the middle, and VSP is on the right, with 2015 in gray and 2016 in black. And what you can notice from this right away is that the Scott Henry system did yield higher than the other systems for both years, although not always statistically significant. And also, although the high cordon and VSP system have similar canopy lengths, so remember Scott Henry has twice the canopy length, so that kind of makes sense why it has a higher yield, but the VSP system has a similar canopy length to the high cordon system, and sometimes we did see that the VSP was yielding less than the high cordon system. And you can see this in both years in La Crescent, and you can see it for Brianna and Frontenac in 2016. And it's interesting to note this about the VSPs for Brianna and La Crescent because both of those are very procumbent or trailing vines which tend to grow downwards. Their shoots tend to grow downwards. And that's in contrast to a VSP system which trains those shoots upright. So we decided to take our yield data and extrapolate what would our yield look like in terms of tons per acre. So you're seeing just single bars here because we took the yield from 2015 and 2016 and averaged it and based our numbers off of an acre with the density of about 576 vines. And once again, you see similar trends here with Scott Henry yielding as high as 8 tons per acre in Frontenac. But as we can see in Brianna and La Crescent, the VSP has very low productivity, yielding about 3 to 3.5 tons per acre. So the range is much bigger for Brianna and La Crescent. And you might be wondering, since we have this higher crop load on the Scott Henry vines and differences in crop load between treatments, how did that affect fruit quality? We sampled our fruit starting a week before veraison in 2015, and starting at veraison, we took weekly samples of our fruit and tested them for sugar and acid levels. And so here you can see graphs of Brianna's soluble solid concentrations and titratable acidity, with soluble solids on the left in pink and titratable acidity on the right in blue, with 2015 on top and 2016 on the bottom, and the treatments listed on the top. And what you'll notice right away is that there was not a lot of segregation between the treatments. which means that the fruit quality was similar between treatments. And Brianna ended up with a soluble solid levels between 16 and 19, and titratable acidity levels between 6 and 7 at harvest date. Similarly, this is a graph showing Frontenac's fruit chemistry, and we also saw very little difference between the treatments, with Frontenac at harvest having sugar levels from about 22 to 23, and titratable acidity levels around 12 to 13. This trend continued with La Crescent, even though we see a little bit of differences in soluble solids for 2015. Overall, the differences were not significant. And you see sugar levels ranging between 18 and 21, and titratable acidity levels ranging from 11 to 14 at harvest. And this is typical for a Wisconsin growing season. And once again, Marquette had similar results with sugar levels between 22 to 24 and acid levels between 9 and 11. So then we decided to look at the effects of training system on vine size, balance, and canopy architecture. So basically, we're trying to see how did these vines perform on each training system. Vine size refers to the amount of vegetative growth that was produced throughout a growing season, and we measure this by looking at the cane pruning weight during the following dormant season. So here you're seeing a graph, and this is in kilograms, just keep that in mind. We have a graph showing cane pruning weights for all 4 cultivars in 2016 and 2017. So what I'm saying by having the 2016-2017 is that cane pruning weights from 2016, cane pruning weights from 2016 are representative of vegetative growth from 2015, whereas the cane pruning weights from 2017 are representative of vegetative growth from 2016. And we didn't see a huge difference between treatments for Frontenac and La Crescent between cane pruning weights. And in general, what we did notice was that sometimes the VSP had higher pruning weights, and you can see this with that red circle around the Brianna treatment. And it's interesting to point out that we did have poor fruit set on Brianna in the 2016 growing season, and which for the VSP system, which potentially was what directed those carbohydrates towards vegetation, leading to higher cane pruning weights in 2017. So vine balance, we just talked about vine size, and now vine balance refers to the concept that the plant has so much energy that it can put towards fruit or vegetation. And so for vine balance, we usually measure this through the Rabaz index, which is a formula that divides fruit yield by those dormant pruning weights that I just showed you. And what that tells us is that if we have higher Rabaz index number, we likely have overcropped our vines, or just in general, you have higher crop on the vine, whereas lower values show a higher amount of vegetative growth to fruit growth. And on these graphs, you see the Rabaz index scale on the left there, and you'll see these light little yellow bars. Those represent the standard range, healthy range for Vitis vinifera vines that has already been established. And I'd like to point out that the cold climate cultivars we're working with, we don't necessarily have a set standard range of what is a healthy Rabaz index value. So basically what you can see from this graph, and what I want to point out is that in some cases we did see some higher values for the Scott-Henry system. And just keep in mind that we did thin the Scott-Henry systems by 25%, So likely these values would be higher if we hadn't thinned it off, which has implications for the longevity of the vine. We also measured the canopy architecture through a method called extended point quadrat analysis. And Amaya mentioned this earlier, but canopy architecture refers to the arrangement of shoots, clusters, and leaves on the vine. So if you have a lot of layers of leaves, or if you have leaves that are blocking clusters, you're going to get a low photosynthetic efficiency of the plant and likely and shading in the clusters as well. So here, just before I explain our results from extended point quadrat analysis, I just want you to take a look at each of these pictures, and you can already see that there's kind of a visual difference between the different systems. And from our results, we noticed a general trend of density, of canopy density, meaning that there were more layers of leaves, which could lead to shading throughout the canopy. So we saw higher density in the high cordon, which is consistent with other studies that have been done on these training systems. And then second, the second most dense was the lower Scott-Henry system, which makes sense because it's a shorter high cordon system, followed by vertical shoot positioning, and then finally the upper Scott-Henry system had the least dense canopy. So finally, although we did not do any statistical analysis, we did record our labor input throughout the 2 seasons. So here's a graph showing labor input in minutes per vine for the 2016 and 2015 growing season, 2016 being in white and 2015 being the red line. And we have pruning in brown, canopy management in the middle in green, and harvest in orange on the ends there. And right away you can see that 2015 growing season took a lot more labor than 2016. Well, that was our first year of this study, and as you know, as growers know, or people doing research, the more years that you work with the vines, the more efficient you get. So we did become more efficient with our practices in 2016. But also, you can see that the Scott-Henry system did take a lot of labor requirements, followed by the high cordon system. And the VSP system, despite having those lower yields, we're seeing that it had a lower labor requirement for it. Although I would like to point out that we are using catch wires on our VSP, so trellis design is just as important as having the right training system. So in summary, we saw that the Scott-Henry system had the highest yield with our values of about 8 tons per acre in the Frontenac. And we saw that the fruit quality traits were not that different from other systems, despite their higher yields, although it did have the highest labor requirement. And this was mostly due to canopy management, which, as I pointed out, we were able to reduce that canopy management time through increasing efficiency during that second growing season. The high wire cordon system yielded more than CSP in general, but it also required more labor. And a lot of this in our specific trial, we might attribute more of that labor input actually just to the whole ergonomics of working with the vine, because our high cordons were, the cordons were placed at 6 feet. And most of us who are working with these vines are not that tall. I'm about 5'4", so it's difficult to work with a 6-foot vine. So really, you got to think about your own worker comfort also when you're choosing a training system. And remember, I pointed out that the high wire cordon system did have a denser canopy, which could lead to more potential shading, and there are a lot of different effects on fruit quality from shading. The vertical shoot positioning system had the lowest yield, about 50% less for Brianna and Lacrescent compared to the other systems, and it required the least amount of labor with a proper trellis. But overall, we saw no significant differences in fruit quality traits among training systems. And with that, I'd like to say, Amaya and I would like to say thank you to our fruit lab crew here at UW, and thank you to our undergraduate research assistants, to all of the people who have helped us at the research station, and our statistics consultant, as well as Bob Stark, who we've worked with on other projects. Thank you.
Any questions?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Amaya and Madeline. We have about 5 minutes for questions, so feel free to continue submitting any questions in the chat bar. Just make sure that you send your question to everyone so we can all see your questions. So we have a couple questions so far. I'll start with Kathy. Kathy asked, was the 25% cluster reduction done on the Scott Henry and yields, sorry about that. Was the 25% cluster reduction done on the Scott Henry and yield still high, or is that recommended forthgoing?
We actually did, so all the values that we're showing is with the 25 reduction. So what Madeline was explaining is that if we had not reduced the yield by 25%, the numbers would be even higher. Is this recommended? Well, the truth is there's a lot of things that we are still, processing and thinking about. One of them is how these high yields, even though they did not impact the quality, which would be the immediate concern of the quality, especially with front and egg. What we are concerned about is about cold hardiness and about how higher yields tend to the vine is putting way more effort and it's more stress, and that could impact achieving higher levels of cold hardiness early on in the fall. And so that's one of the things we were concerned. We have not seen any significant difference in terms of damage. Actually, we have not seen a lot of damage here in Wisconsin, in the south part of Wisconsin, on these cultivars. And so, but that on the long term would be a concern. We don't think that this could be sustainable, but that is something that we will continue measuring, and we will try to continue keeping up the high yields just to see the long-term effects of the training system. One thing to point out in these studies is that what we usually see at the very beginning, during maybe the 3, 4, 5 years, can dramatically change when we have long-term studies, and trends can change over time. Unfortunately, I don't have a right answer, but for now, for the first 2 years that we did this, the yields were high and the fruit quality did not decrease, and we did not see any effect on cold hardiness. We did not measure it, but we did not see any damage. The following year and the following spring, the vines looked just fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying, Amaya. So a couple more questions. Kevin asks a 2-part question. Are the vines completely dormant pruned for 2017, or did you leave late pruning to be finished? And along with that, did pruning times go down significantly in 2017?
We just finished pruning last week, so those numbers I see for 2017 was what we recorded last week. We're done. We pruned everything. We did not do any long pruning this time. We just, pruned to the standard number of buds. And what was the second question?
Did pruning times go down in 2017?
They did, because part of this, as we say, these 2015 and 2016 were the first 2 years that we were yielding, so we were bearing fruit on these vines. And so there was still a lot in 2015 when we were doing the pruning of correcting some canes and the cordons, so it did take a little bit longer the first year. The second year, it reduced consistently because we did a pretty good job in establishing them and finishing the final architecture of the vines. And as Madeline was saying, we got so much more efficient at pruning them.
Okay. So another question. This is from Mike White. I was surprised to see less labor required for VSP. Most studies and experience trends for less labor for a high wire system. Curious why your results differed. And then Brian also wrote, I was thinking the same as Mike. Our Marquette on VSP is a monster to manage. Many laterals require many passes to keep the fruit zone open.
So 2 things. One, and Madeline pointed out, our high cordon, and I think that this is very important, a good lesson of the study, is that our high cordon was, the cordons were established at 6 feet high, which is really high for Madeline and I, that we are 5'4". So, I mean, that was super it was so tiring to try to comb those shoots and also just to harvest. So that was one thing. If we would have a higher cordon in which the cordons have not been so high, maybe if we would have reduced the amount of labor. The other thing, depending on what you were saying, Marquette and VSP is such a monster, that I think that another big lesson that we had here is the timing of when you do the shoot thinning and the timing of removing laterals. If you do that early on, when those laterals are small and they don't get out of control, it's much more efficient. I know this is hard when you extrapolate it in acres and acres of vineyard. We had a small research block, but that is what we managed to do. And I think that Madeline, that did most of the work out there, have some comments about it too.
Yeah, well, I think that having those catch wires makes a huge difference. And like Amaya said, trying to work out the density of a canopy early on in the season is really important. But if you're working with tapeners, it's going to take a really long time. But something that I really noticed with our high cordon systems and having Marquette on a high cordon system is that those shoots get very difficult to work with mid-season when you want to comb them out. And so basically, when I would be combing those vines, they were less easy to work with. They were more rigid. There was more breaking going on. And it seems like that was reducing, we'd lose shoots from that. So that made it very difficult to manage.
Yeah, thanks, Madeline. We noticed that too in our vineyards in northern New York, especially with the Marquette high wire cordon. They really get in there early.
Which was not the case when we were
the catch wires
with the Brianna and the La Crescent. We really liked that system. It was so much easier to manage them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have one comment from Patrick. It sounds like mechanized shoot positioning is in order for these varieties.
Be cool. Mm-hmm. If we could do that, yes.
Great. So I think we have to move on to our next presenter. Madeline and Amaya, will you stay tuned for the next presentation?
Yes, we will. We will just mute ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. And if any participants have additional questions, feel free to continue typing them in the chat bar, and perhaps Amaya and Madeline can answer those.
Absolutely.
And also feel free to email me any questions, and we can post those on our Facebook page and respond to you as well. So with that, yeah, thank you, Amaya and Madeline, for your presentation. And now we'll be switching over to Paolo Sabbatini.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And I'm about to switch. Let's see here. I just have to find your. There you are. Okay, so Paolo, you should have presenter status.
Yes, I think I'm all set.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today and share with you a quick summary of all the results that we got from this Northern Grain project. So we go through the 5 years, the 5 experimental years, giving you, I think, what is the most important thing that we discover working mainly with Marquette and Michigan State. And I want to thank my technician Pat Murat and my master student Josh for helping me in preparing this presentation, but mainly for helping me to maintain the vineyard and helping me in the lab for the fruit analysis. The other people I want really to thank is Dave Martinson and Chris Limpartica for really working very hard on this project. Now Alex is trying to keep the project alive. Thanks to Mike White, that was able to leverage a little bit of money to support the project during the end of the funding, the end of last year. At Michigan State, we got some help also from the Ag Bio Research for our research plot, and I want to thank you, the Southwest Station, with Dave Francis, the farm manager, and my colleague Tom Zabala for giving us the possibility to work with Marquette at our experimental station. And I want to thank you also people at the horticulture teaching and research facility here in East Lansing, where we had some other experiments also on superlative varieties. And we had during these 5 years, we had also industry interaction. The most important one was with Bob Butter, a flying out vineyard, and and it was very interesting to work with the private growers on these topics of the super hardy variety. So as I said, we had 3 locations for the experimental activities, in the southwest close to Benton Harbor, in Adrian with the private growers, and here in East Lansing. And today I will focus mostly on the results coming from the southwest station. So in the heart of one of the most important appellations that we have in Michigan. And I will show data on our work on trailing systems, on crop load and canopy management. So this is the outline of my talk. I will try to cover different things, why market is important in Michigan, and why we start to work with trailing systems. And we had 2 years that were really different. 2012, we got a huge frost very early in the spring, and 2014 was the year of the polar vortex. Unfortunately, we were unable to collect any data in 2014, so I will not show any data about 2014 because the vineyard went through very, very severe damages, and the data didn't have a lot of meaning for us. But we'll talk a little bit about 2012, and after we'll focus on 4-year study on trellis system, crop load, and canopy management. So we don't have a lot of acres on market in Michigan, and as you see from the right table from the USD report of 2015, we have more than 13,000 acres in Michigan, and 80% is mostly Concord and Niagara, and we have a little bit more than 2,000 acres of vinifera and 760 acres of hybrids. So we have almost 3 times more vinifera than hybrid. But if you take a look at the graph on the right, you see the evolution of the Michigan wine industry from the 70s up to now as a number of acres. So you can see that really the spending of our industry is due to planting of vinifera. And there was a lot of planting of hybrid until the 90s, and after you see the line reaching a plateau. But in this not a lot of planting of hybrid right now in Michigan. Most of the planting is market. So 40% of the new hybrid acreage is mainly market. And if you take a look at the map in the center of the slide, you see the most important. We have until last year we had 4 appellations in Michigan, 2 in the southwest and 2 in the northwest. But now, as far as 2016, we have a 5th appellation. It's tip of the meat. Is north of Traverse City. It's really at the top of Michigan, and that appellation is really focused on super hardy variety. So that is where market was heavily planted in the last few years. So as far as the training system, a presentation will be similar to the presentation that you saw before. We use our cordon training system. We tried the gene-evaluable cordon for market. And when we started the research at Michigan State in 2011, there was an interesting article that came out from an Italian group of researchers about the modification of the VSP training system that we call movie trellis. So it's just a VSP training system that's separated. So it's like a V. It's like having two VSP together. And we decided to do some experimentation on this for a simple reason that having a training system which you can have a V, so it's movable wire, so the training system can open. Our idea was that in a cool climate like Michigan, having the possibility to trap more sun and more heat during the season will be beneficial for ripening the grapes. And at the same time, you have the beneficial impact and knowledge of growing grapes on a VSP training system. As I said to you before, we'll go through what happened quickly in 2012. Already present this data in another webinar, but I will go through very quickly. So 2012, as you see from the graph on the left, was a very difficult, very different year. Here you see the growing degree days in red of the last 10 years mean and what happened in 2012. So we had a very, very early start of the season and huge growing degrees accumulation at the beginning of March and the first week of April. So the season started very early. And if you see some from the graph to the right, you see the temperature, and unfortunately, after bud break, we got several frost events below the 32 Fahrenheit. So we got a huge damage on Marquette. Marquette is a variety that tends to bud break very early. You see from the graph is the first bud break variety that we have in Michigan. It's a couple of weeks before Concord and tends to bud break around 20-30 days early than the classical vinifera variety that we're growing in Michigan. So Marquette got frost, and that's, you see from the picture what happened. We got a lot of damages on the primary shoots, and most of the canopy was formed by shoots coming out from secondary buds. And we follow what happened to the canopy and what happened to the clusters. So we had a mixed population of clusters coming out from primary shoots or coming out from secondary shoots, and you see on the graph on the left the evolution of berry size and sugar accumulation. So the cluster that were on secondary shoots, that tends to grow the berries a little bit later than the primary shoots, but you see that at the end of the season they catch up pretty well, so there were no difference in berry size. For the sugar accumulation is the same. Brix was different at the beginning of the season because cluster on secondary shoots that tends to develop later, so all the phenological stage were later, but they catch up pretty well at the end of the season. The same story for color compounds. So at harvest time there was no difference between clusters that were on primary shoots or secondary shoots. Here you see some data. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, just to show you that we didn't find any difference after the frost in relation to the three training systems. So all the classical parameters were the same, so the vines went through the same kind of damage, not a lot of difference on classical parameters. So you see on the table below about the trellis systems, you know, the GDC tended to have a little bit higher sugar accumulation, and the same trend is for phenolics, but not different in color. So there was a little bit of advantage in fruit quality as far as the GDC training system, and the moving trellis didn't really perform at the same level of the IY cordon or the GDC. So we didn't see any difference, as I said, between the training systems. The most interesting thing was the basic fruit chemistry between the cluster that were on primary shoots or on secondary shoots at the end of the season was very similar. We didn't see any difference also in yield per vine in relation to the three training systems. And the most interesting thing from my point of view is that with 80% of primary back yield, Marquette vines were able to crop 2 tons per acre. That's a pretty large amount of fruit in relation to the huge damage that we got here. And we make wines from the clusters, so we separated the cluster from primary and secondary shoots. And also, if the basic fruit chemistry was the same at harvest, there were differences between the wines, and the panel, the tested wines, were able to test the difference between the two experimental wines. So even if the basic fruit chemistry was the same, still the wine produced with the 2 different population of grapes were a little bit different, and the panel was able to really test differences between the 2 wines. And if you have an interest in reading more about this experiment and the results of the frost on Marquette vines, in a couple of weeks we should have out this publication. So just send me an email, and I will send you our work, our publication on this topic. So moving faster to the experimental activity of 2013-16, we work mainly on 3 areas. We work in keeping the comparison between the train system. We modify the crop load, as you saw before from the previous presentation, and we work on canopy management, mainly on leaf removal around the clustered zone. And the objective were pretty simple, to study the interaction between how the canopy is growing and the yield, and what's the difference of having a cluster really exposed to the sun or in the shade, and what's the impact on the fruit quality at harvest. So here's the data that compare the three training systems, and as I said, this set of data is an average of all the experimental years, but not 2014, because in 2014 the polar vortex really did a lot of damage on our vineyards. And as you see from the data, as we expected, GDC was the training system that produced more fruit, an average of more than 6 tons per acre, followed by high wire cordon, but there were no statistical difference between the two. And the training system that didn't crop at the same level of the other two was the moving trellis. We didn't find any difference in basic fruit chemistry, Brix, pH, and TA. All the three training systems were able to really produce high quality fruit. And the date of harvest in these 3 experimental years varied a lot from the end of August to the end of September. So in relation to the growing season, we harvest the grapes really a different time during the season. There were 30 days of difference between an early harvest and a late harvest for Marquette. 2 things I want to remind you. The first, that for us, Marquette is a very early ripening varieties when we compare Marquette to the other varieties that were growing in Michigan. So there is nothing that ripes early for us in Michigan like Marquette. And the second thing, I guess you can see from the acidity level, 7.6.5, 6.6. All the data, as I said before, I'm showing to you are coming from the Southwest Experimental Station that is in Benton Harbor. It's probably the most warmer location that we have in Michigan for growing grapes. It's very close to the lake, and there is a little bit of elevation, and it's a very, very sandy soils. So it's one of the premier site for growing grapes in Michigan that we have, and it doesn't mean the Marquette will perform the same in any other location in Michigan, but this is the data that are coming from the Southwest Station of Michigan in Benton Harbor. So from the experiment on trellis system, we decided to focus the crop load experiment only on the high wire cordon. The reason is because the moving trellis was a little bit complicated and didn't crop at the same level than the other varieties. And during our research activities, I remember very well a presentation of Tim Martinson in which he showed pretty clearly that when you grow Marquette on a VSP training system, that tends to reduce cluster size. So there is a problem in Marquette in bud differentiation related to the orientation of the shoots. So it seems the Marquette didn't like a lot to grow vertically, so we decided to go with the high wire cordon because we didn't find a difference with GDC, and high wire cordon is the most preferred training system for our industry. So we focused the crop load experiments on a high wire cordon. And now we show you some data in which we manage the crop load removing cluster for the vines. So it's a cluster thinning experiment. The cluster thinning was done at fruit set, and it's an experiment. So the data that are coming from now on are mainly related to an experiment which we try really to test the system. So we really stress the vines to a very, very high yield per acre. So it doesn't mean that this is the yield that our industry is shooting for. It's an experiment, so we are trying really to see when the system will break under the pressure of a lot of yield per vine. So we had we set up 3 different cropping level, around 5 tons per acre, 8 tons per acre, 10 tons per acre, very high level of yield. You see the data from the table, the cluster per vine, so 264 cluster per vine in a high crop load down to 100 cluster per vine in what we call low crop load, and you see the long mean average that we have on cluster weight, berry per cluster, berry weight, pruning weight didn't really have a huge impact in relation to the tons per acre and mainly the pruning weight. So when you increase the tons per acre, yes, you have a reduction in pruning weight, like the two speakers before the show. But no other change in any basic yield components like cluster weight was not impacted, berries per cluster was not impacted, and the berry weight was not impacted. So this is the data we show you, and this is the first experiment which we had 3 years of data on yield components and fruit chemistry on these 3 different levels of cropping studies. And you see that when you have a low crop load, you tend to increase the Brix, and nothing new, and you have also a change in phenolics and anthocyanin compounds. The lower is the yield per vine, the higher is the concentration of sugar, phenolics, anthocyanins. This is nothing new. The most interesting thing is that between the high and the medium, so between 8 and 10 tons per acre, there was no difference in any parameters in relation to basic fruit chemistry, but there was a difference in phenolics and anthocyanins. So the next question that we had was how we can increase the concentration of sugar, color compounds, and phenolic compounds in high yielding vines. So how we can make phenolics, anthocyanins, and sugar concentration a little bit higher when you are dealing with a high cropping situation. So to do that, we introduce canopy management techniques. So we did the leaf removal at the pre-veraison stage, in which we expose 100% of the cluster to the sun, and we try to work around the time of harvest. So as I said, Marquette arrives very early in Michigan, especially in the Southwest Station, from the end of August to the first, second, third week of September. So the season is still going on. So we have a lot of time to play with the time of harvest. So we measure a lot of different things at the level of the cluster, temperature, solar radiation. So we had a really condition in which we had clusters that were mostly in the shade of the canopy and clusters that were under the sun. And those are the results. You see the 3 different groups, still the high cropping vines, medium and low, in which we had yes or no leaf removal. And here we're going through the different basic fruit chemistry plus color compounds. The first thing that you notice, and we'll try to go slow, I know that there is a lot of data, but if you focus just on one of the parameters like Brix, you see that at each level of cropping, high, medium, or low, every time you introduce a leaf removal application, you see that there is a bump in sugar concentration. So for example, high cropping level, you go from 20.9 to 33.8. So every time at each level you introduce a leaf removal technique, so you expose the cluster under the sun, a pre-veraison stage, you improve sugar accumulation. The same thing you do, you reduce acidity concentration, again, for example, in the first high cropping levels, 6.9 to 6.5. So there is a reduction in acidity due to the fact that 100% of the cluster is under the sun, so there is an increase in temperature, and there is more metabolic activities related to acid degradation. The most interesting thing for me was related to color compounds accumulation. As you see, for example, in the low and the medium cropping vines, you see that there is a very high concentration of anthocyanins, more than 1,000 milligrams per liter. And it's very low when it comes to the high cropping level without leaf removal, 797. But as soon as you apply a leaf removal technique, you have the same color concentration in high cropping vines than the low cropping vines. So there is no statistical difference from a 10 tons per acre with a leaf removal application when you compare 5 tons per acre with or without leaf removal. So the leaf removal was very, very important to increase sugar and color compounds in high cropping vines, and brought the same level, bringing the same level of concentration of low yielding vines in the same location, harvest at the same time. And we try to manage now also the harvest time. And we did an experiment, unfortunately, only in 2015. And we tried to harvest the grapes not at the same time, but harvesting the grapes at the same amount of sugar. So we target 24 bricks. And on the graph, you see the growing degree days and the precipitation at the Southwest Station in Benton Harbor. Every month in Michigan, we get some rain, and you can see from the graph. But the most interesting things, I think for you, they're coming from different states, is take a look at the growing degree days. In 2015, we reached 3,000 growing degree days. You see the line is still growing at the end of October, so it was a very long, warm season, 2015. And 3,000 growing degree days is pretty a lot to eat for a viticulture region. And here you see the data when we harvest the grapes at 24 bricks. So bricks accumulation was 23.9, 24.6, and 24.8 for the 3 different cropping levels, and there were a couple of weeks of difference in harvest time. So we harvest the low cropping level September 17th and the high cropping level on September 29th, so after 2 weeks. So, and you see the tons per acre, 5.3, 8.5, 10.2. So waiting 2 weeks or 1 week in relation to the low cropping level and the medium cropping level was enough for making all the difference in total soluble solids and other basic fruit chemistry parameters, phenolics, anthocyanins, to disappear. So waiting 2 weeks on high cropping level, so harvesting the grapes at the end of September, was enough to give enough hanging time to the grapes to reach the same concentration of basic fruit chemistry, phenolics, and co-compounds of low yielding vines in the same location. So as I said before, the season was very long, so we were able to wait until the end of September, and in general, the location, we can do that. Still, the weather is pretty good at the end of September, and that hanging time was really important for us to get the grapes 24 bricks with the same amount of concentration of other very important compounds for the production of quality wines. With this, I would like to conclude with a kind of couple of questions. So that will be something that we would like to approach if the next another grain project will be funded. The first one is sustainability, and I think Amaya and the other speaker already talked about that. So every time you increase the yield per vine, you reduce the vegetation portion of the vines. And you see here on the graph on the left, you're increasing the yield, you reduce the shoot length, and we really crop the vines to very high level. I don't think any growers that crop the vines to the level. We wanted to see if we were able to reach levels of croppings in which the vines were unable to respond to our treatment, and so far we didn't find a higher limit for market. But we saw a reduction in vine size, so I don't know. The question is how many years you can do that to a vineyard, and the answer is we don't know, I guess. And the other thing is that it's a very cold-hardy variety, but we have a lot of data in literature that show that heavy cropping can reduce cold hardiness. So that's another open question for us. We don't know which cropping level for Marquette in particular, but also for the other super varieties, will impact the cold hardiness of these varieties. So those are open questions, and I want to give you a few conclusions before going to the question. I think for us in Michigan, we know the Marquette is very prone to frost. But the good news is that also with a very, very heavy damage, we were able to harvest 2 tons per acre, so it's not bad when we compare with other varieties. And basic fruit chemistry was almost the same between clusters that were on primary shoot or on secondary shoot. And as I said, Marquette arrives very, very early for Michigan standards, and it's at least a month early than any other any other signature red vinifera that we have, like Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc. And this is very important because the end of the season tends to be some years very iffy in Michigan, with a lot of rain and a lot of bunch rot and very early fall frost. And the other thing is very important that I noticed during these 5 years of research is Marquette is very resilient to cropping levels. So you can crop really a lot of fruit in Michigan condition on Marquette. And also with a lot of fruit is Marquette will keep going accumulation of sugar and basic fruit chemistry parameters. And we respond also very well, I think, in my opinion, to canopy management techniques. And as I said you before, with just leaf removal, we were able to harvest grapes with the same amount of color compounds from a vineyard from vines that 10 tons per acre or 5 tons per acre, so doubling the amount of oil per vine. By implementing leaf removal treatments, was able to give us the same amount of color compounds at harvest. And being Marquette so early in Michigan, they give us also the possibility to work a little bit on the harvest time. So postponing harvest time of a couple of weeks, so 3 weeks, on very high yielding vines was enough to bring the basic fruit chemistry parameters at the same level of low yielding vines. And with this, I think I will open to questions. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Paolo. Yeah, we have a few questions. I'll start at the top. This is from Kevin. Is there any Scott Henry research available from Michigan in colder climates?
We are not working right now on Scott Henry and super hardy variety. I don't know any growers in Michigan that are trying to do that. I think we have research coming from other states. We saw from the presentation before in Wisconsin, they tried the terrain system. So we don't do that in Michigan yet. So.
Okay. This is a two-part question from Kevin and Sean. What time of season did you conduct leaf removal and hedging? And from Sean, what was the degree of leaf removal?
We did everything pre-veraison, so around a week before veraison. And the degree of leaf removal was enough to expose 100% of the cluster to the sun. So we didn't really count the number of leaves, but we make sure that the cluster was completely exposed to the sun.
Okay. And when did you conduct the leaf removal?
There was 1 week before veraison.
Okay.
10 days before veraison.
Okay. Keith asks, how far apart are the Marquette grapes planted?
So the experimental vineyard is 6 feet between vines and 10 feet between rows. Sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Okay. We have a question from Jonathan. Interesting about bud differentiation relative to canopy and trellis system. Can you explain this more?
I can explain this more with data that are not coming from my experiments, but there is a lot of work done in the past on different varieties in relation to shoot orientation and light and temperature. So every time you have a shoot growing under the light with very good temperature above 65 Fahrenheit, 20 Celsius, you improve bud differentiation for the next year. Every time you grow vinifera downward, or in the case of the data coming from Tim Martinson, in which he showed the grow Marquette on a vertical shoot positioning, seems that there is an impact on bud differentiation. So what we know is that the cluster tends to be smaller, and that's what I know. So if you think about an high-wire cordon training system, for example, we have a lot of data on Concord, in which if you do some shoot positioning, if you expose the top of the cordon to the sun, you improve bud differentiation for the next year, and the same for a lot of different varieties, from table grapes to wine grapes. As a relation to orientation, is true the same. There are a lot of data coming from vinifera, and I think with Tim Martinson will be the first set of data coming from an hybrid variety that growing vertically tends to reduce cluster size, so consequently bud differentiation.
Okay. We have a question from Mike White. Is
Yes.
there a general rule of thumb or your experience of how much you can increase yield when going from a single high wire to a Geneva double curtain?
Uh, uh, what we see, what we see in Michigan in relation to my data on Marquette, I think we are shooting for well-managed GDC between 1.5 and 2 tons per acre. That's the increase. And I think thinking about some old data coming from Concord trial, the numbers are pretty the same. So there are a lot of research done on Concord, single wire or GDC, and I think the long-term average increase is about 2 tons per acre.
Okay. Let's see. A question from Kevin. Hedging done? If so, when and how many leaves beyond the cluster do you recommend?
Okay. Edging was done in Marquette not every year. We had the dry summers, and the Marquette didn't grow beyond the necessity of edging the vines. In general, we edge before veraison time. 2-3 weeks before veraison is the time when we tend to edge. And the second question is how many leaves beyond the cluster. I don't have specific numbers, so I will guess in relation to my experience here in Michigan, see Concord and see Marquette vines. I think we have always more than 15 leaves, between 12 and 20 leaves above beyond the cluster, so Marquette shoots before edging.
Okay. Yeah, and I have a question for you, Paolo.
Yeah, please.
You have a couple years of data on cold hardiness, and including the polar vortex. Looking forward, if there's a second phase of the Northern Grapes project, what aspects of canopy management might you emphasize to really make vines more cold hardy?
I think vines are like super hardy varieties are like any other variety. So shoot positioning and distance between shoots and exposing the cluster to the sun, anything that we really do with other cultivar will be very important also for Marquette. So there will be something that wood maturation and a ripening process of the wood in a training system would be always very important to consider when we think about cold hardiness. So light and temperature, classical parameters. The other thing, and that we don't see so much in the location that we have at the southwest, but I see a lot of reports from other people and also from growers coming from another part of Michigan, is the vigor. So Marquette tends to be very early bud break and very vigorous. So anything that goes in the reduction of the vigor in situation in which there is too much vigor will help also in improving cold hardiness. So the classical problem with having very vigorous shoots that tends to have very large canes. They don't go very well through the winter, and when you have too much vegetation, you have also a lot of shade. So again, shedding is a problem when it comes to cold hardiness. So just to give you an idea, where I will take a look is always light and temperature at the level of the buds and the level of the canes. So more shoot positioning, shoot thinning, and leaf removal, and at the same time controlling the vigor.
Great. Thank you, Paolo. We have a comment from Mike White, and then we'll conclude today's presentation. Mike says, thank you. Very good webinar. So glad we were able to do this in 2017. Thank you very much to our sponsors.
Yeah. Thank you to Mike to keeping pushing a lot, pushing hard to keep the program going.
Great. So thank you, Paolo, and thank you, Amaya and Madeline, for your presentations today. Thank you to our sponsors for their continued support, as well as all of today's participants. At this time, I'd like to remind everyone that the webinar series will continue on Tuesdays of each month through May. Be sure to visit our Facebook page and feel free to email me any additional questions that you may have from today's webinar. Paolo, I might paste your email in there as well if anyone, there's a couple of comments about your upcoming publication. And I'll take any unanswered questions from today's discussion and send them to our presenters, and we'll try to answer those on Facebook as well. The next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, April 11th with Anna Catherine Mansfield from Cornell University. It'll be called Put a Cork in It, an update on wine closures. According to Anna Catherine, once you've bottled your wine and shipped it out to the world, its only defense against spoilage is a sound closure, and there are many closures to choose from. Picking the right one for your wine is key to knowing that your consumers will get to taste your wine in optimal condition. The April webinar will cover the multitude of closures available and the strengths and weaknesses of each. Another reminder that slides and a recording of today's webinar will be posted on the Northern Grapes Project website as well as our Facebook page. Thank you again for our presenters and for all of those who participated today, and have a good day.